First reports and discussion is affordable housing. Calling forward. Alicia Arnold, she's here. Please come to the podium.
Greetings. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all tonight, Mayor and council members. I am Jessica Holmes, Chair of the Wake County Board of Commissioners, and we're here along with our staff to discuss some of our efforts regarding affordable housing. And before I introduce you to our staff, I think there's a even more important issue that I need to bring to your attention, and that's the basketball game that's going on tonight.
That's right.
So go Trojans. So I'll start with introducing our Housing and Transportation Director, Alicia Arnold, and also Mr. Coates. And so I'll allow them to present their presentation to you all, and then the three of us will answer any follow-up questions that you have. So, Ms. Arnold.
This up here. Again, thank you for having us this evening. We're happy to be here to talk to you about the Wake County Affordable Housing Plan, which was passed by the Wake County Commissioners last October. So for you today, we're going to talk a little bit about some context as it relates to the Affordable Housing Plan and why it was important for us to complete this document, as well as some demographics related to Garner and housing in Garner, as well as an overview of what the plan has within it, including the recommendations that are in the plan, as well as the current phase that we're in right now, which is the implementation. So first, to provide some context, what is affordable housing? Affordable housing is defined by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development as affordable if an individual is not paying more than 30% of their income on rent and utilities. And so that metric changes based off of a person's income. And there's not a single easy kind of mark of where you can say this particular figure is affordable, but more so making sure that folks are not paying more than the 30% of their income. Because once you start paying more than 30% of your income on housing, you start taking away from other things such as education and health care, child care, food. And so that's why that is an important metric. But also too, affordable housing comes in different types. And so you can see some representations here. It can be anything from affordable home ownership opportunities to multifamily affordable housing. There's senior housing for affordability. We also have a picture here of rehabilitation of properties that help people to maintain their home and stay in their home longer, or even upfit it for disabilities. We also have permanent supportive housing, which combines supportive services with housing that's affordable to make sure that individuals are able to become stable and to live in their home and in their communities successfully. I also want to point out too that there's really no difference between affordable housing and regular housing. The only thing that's different is that the funding on the front end is different. So the financial subsidy is there for the housing to become affordable for the individuals to be able to pay what is a fair share of their income. Also to point out that affordable housing is generally supported, and we talk about affordable housing and programs that are supported by the county. We're really in that space that the natural market is not producing on its own. So we're in those income ranges where there are folks that are working class citizens of our community that are not making incomes that will support their access to what the current market is producing. So who are those individuals? So when we're talking about what affordable housing serves, and really the data that we've gathered through our planning process, we've realized that families and households earning less than $39,000 a year are really having a hard time finding access to affordable home ownership as well as affordable rental units in our community. And so some of those jobs that are represented in there and some of those compositions of those families are going to be folks that work in the healthcare industries, folks that work in retail or work in hospitality. It can even be teachers or teachers' assistants, as well as some of our law enforcement or public safety positions. And so when you look at if a family has only a single income, or two individuals, heads of households with children, are only working minimum wage jobs, these are going to be the folks that are working members of our community that are not able to access what the market's currently producing. And so why is affordable housing important? So people often think of kind of the individual benefit for affordable housing, that it fulfills the basic human need for shelter. It contributes to the well-being of both the parents and the children, both in a physical and a mental health way, as well as reducing stress and toxins, which can also ultimately affect kind of that physical health care as well. And it also frees up funds to spend on healthcare. But there's also the economic benefit of affordable housing that's often overlooked. And that affordable homes is a great economic development tool in that it can attract and retain employees and provide competitive advantages for employers in the area, because their employers are able to live close to where they work, to be able to stably live in housing, so you don't have to worry about folks moving often and uprooting or not showing up for work or being uprooted from their communities.
I just wanted to take a moment to point out that all of you should recognize one of your colleagues here in the photo. These photos were taken at what I called Elected Officials Build Day. Habitat for Humanity has been one of the county's key partners in providing affordable housing, and is one of my favorite models. Habitat for Humanity is sort of the quintessential hand up as opposed to a hand out. And also, the individuals that receive Habitat houses, they have to put in sweat equity. They have to meet certain criteria. They're working on their credit. But it's the perfect example of families working towards home ownership and having to really put in the work in order to earn it. So Habitat for Humanity is a great partner to the county, and also just one of my favorite nonprofit organizations addressing housing affordability. So we hope this year to continue having an annual Elected Officials Build Day, and I invite each of you to come out and get your hands dirty, as Mr. Marshburn did. It's really a great experience, and it's great for elected officials to see each other outside of suits and outside of formal settings. And so it was a really great opportunity for us to talk about an issue that impacts all areas of Wake County, but also to fellowship in a way that we don't traditionally get to do inside of boardroom settings.
Thank you.
Can I just make a quick comment? I was glad they snapped this picture before I fell off the ladder there. So, thank you.
We lived through it.
So I'm going to let Brian Coates, my colleague at Wake County in the planning department, come up and talk a little bit about the demographics as it relates to Garner.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. The next few slides, we're going to go over demographics on the town of Garner, its residents, and also the jobs within the town of Garner and where those folks come from that work here, as well as those that live here. So the first slide is going off the categories that Alicia mentioned, talking about incomes for certain professions. So in the town of Garner, this is a 5-year average. All of our data is coming from the U.S. Census. It's a 5-year average. It changes as we go out the 5 years. Roughly, there are about 10,800 households in Garner. And households can mean one person, or they can mean many people living in that housing unit. Traditionally, it's a mix. But roughly about 2,600 households in Garner earn less than $39,000 a year. So it's about 24% of your households are earning less than that $39,000 that Alicia mentioned. It can struggle finding rental or home ownership. This next slide talks about owner-occupied units. There are roughly almost 7,000 owner-occupied housing units in the town of Garner with a median value of $164,800, which means the median is half the homes in the town of Garner are worth more than that, half are less, so the median's that midway point. And the bulk of the housing units in the town of Garner currently, about 59% range between 100,000 and 200,000. So just quickly looking at the math, if you don't want to spend more than 30% of your household income on a house, to meet a lot of those categories, you would need to at least earn about 50,000 in order to purchase a home and not spend more than 30% of your budget. And you look at the chart on the right, which is the median household income. Median for the town of Garner is 59,000. But as you can see, there's roughly 42% are earning under 50,000. So there's a lot of households that are looking for, whether it be homeownership or rental, in that lower range under, say, let's say under $150,000 to purchase. The next slide shows a graph. This is from 2000 to 2016. This is the number of households in each category that the census breaks out. The town of Garner has pretty much gained households in all income levels. There are a few household categories that declined. Those between 20,000 and 25,000 and 25 to 30,000 did decline over those 16 years. And then you can see on all the other categories, the number of households increased. In lower income, there are roughly 200 households earning between 15 and 20,000 more than there were in 2000. And then on the high end, there are about close to 700 households earning between 100,000 and 125,000 in the town. This next slide shows the number of housing units and structures. Roughly 71% of Garner's housing is single-family detached homes. That's the traditional ranch or split level or housing unit on, let's say, a quarter acre, not attached to other units. And then there are plenty of other categories that deal with multifamily. So there are large apartment buildings that have more than 20 to 50 units, and then there are some duplexes. I noticed one under construction across the street when I came in. So you have somewhat of a mix, but you're really heavy on the single-family detached housing units. The circle charts here on the right show the year they were built. Roughly more than 50% of the units were built before 1990. And then as far as renter-occupied units, there are roughly almost 4,000 rental units within the town of Garner. And the median rent, we don't have that on the slide, the median rent from American Community Surveys through the census is roughly $954 for a rental. And the data shows 46% of those renting are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. So that is definitely a stat that we look at countywide and at the municipal level, because those households could, as Alicia said, have some strain if something comes up, whether it's car repairs or daycare needs. When you're spending more than 30% for housing, you may not have money left for much else. Yes?
Brian, there's a lot of numbers. Could you go back over for the last 30 seconds and what you were talking about, comparing the rental units versus the owner-occupied single family and apartment, and then lead back up to your cost per month?
Yep. So roughly in Garner, there's about close to 7,000 owner-occupied units. And there are about 4,000 renter-occupied units. And on that previous slide, the bulk of owner-occupied units, their value was between roughly 100,000 and 200,000 was the bulk of those value for those housing units. When it comes to renter-occupied, current median rent is roughly $954 for a rental unit. And that takes into account 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. It just condenses them into one number. And that median rent countywide in all municipalities has increased at a much higher pace than a cost of owner-occupied housing.
How recent is there's a lot of apartment units going up, and in Garner, as we speak, there's at least three different, maybe four different significant size units going up. One of them, I reckon there's probably 1,000 to 1,200 units under construction right now. Are those included in that renter occupied, that 3,000 or that roughly $4,000 figure?
They are
I mean,
not. So
4,000.
this number is from the US Census. It takes a 5-year average from 2012 to 2016. So the next 5-year estimate we'll get for the county and municipalities will be 2013 through 2017, and then it shifts for those 5-year cycles. Those units, I would imagine, will either show up 2017, 2018 numbers. And it would be interesting, out of the apartments under construction, what their rents will be, and if they bring that 954 up, or stabilize it, or it declines. I highly don't think it would decline, but
I have no
that'll be
idea.
interesting to see what happens with the median rent as more units come online.
Thank you.
So this next slide shows the residents in the town of Garner versus the Wake County median by age grouping. Garner's median age is currently 37 and a half years of age, which means half the residents are younger than that, half are older. The Wake County median is roughly 35 and a half. So Garner just skews a few years older than the county as an average. When you look at the age categories, where Garner outpaces the county is in those age brackets that are 55 and older through 85 years. So you have a little more senior population than the county overall. But we recently had a conversation with another municipality, Eastern Wake, and their numbers were very similar to yours, in that the older population, they were skewing a few years older than the county average. There's going to be quite a lot of numbers, so I'll try to go through it strategically. The main focus of this slide is 6% of Garner's residents with primary jobs, and a primary job is the job that pays you the most, live and work in Garner, which is roughly 770 residents live and have their primary job in the town of Garner.
That's a very low number.
It is. So there are roughly 13,000 people that are employed in Garner. 12,548 of those live outside of Garner and commute here for their primary jobs. So roughly about 94% of the jobs in Garner are filled by people who live outside of Garner. And I'll have another slide that'll show you where they're coming from as well, and where your residents are working. So in Garner, the jobs are located in this slide on the heavily blue areas. So if you look, the White Oak area, the industrial park on the east side of 40, where there's a lot of manufacturing warehouse jobs currently, and then along the major corridors as retail service type industry as well. For those in Garner, there are roughly 3,500 that earn less than $15,000 a year, 4,900 that earn between $15,000 and $40,000, and roughly 4,800 who earn more than $40,000. In those top 3 job sectors, there are a lot more than 3. We just fit 3 on the slide as the top 3. Roughly 2,600 of Garner residents work in retail trade, 1,700 in accommodations and food service, and roughly 1,600 in construction. The next category, just slightly under construction, was educational services, which is school system, teachers, employees of the various schools. The next slide, roughly 44% of Garner's 12,380 residents with a primary job earn more than $40,000. The
Meaning
next-
that 56% or less.
Yes. So the top 3 job sectors were those that live in Garner and commute out every day. 1,500 are in the healthcare field, 1,400 retail, and 1,100 in educational services. Which, if you remember Alicia's 4 categories of some of those scales of wages, those are in some of those categories that are definitely under the 39,000 range traditionally. So when we talk about where do Garner residents work, roughly 5,100 commute to Raleigh. So roughly 42% are going somewhere in the city of Raleigh. 8% or just over 1,000 are going to Cary. There's that 770 that are actually living and working in Garner. And then roughly about 700 are going to Durham. Now the list gets long as you break out the smaller categories of where people are going, but those are the top 4 when it comes to commute patterns for the residents of Garner. And then it talks about the distance they're traveling. Roughly 14%, roughly 1,700 are driving more than 50 miles to work. And so out of the 13,000 workers that live in or work in Garner, roughly 2,300 live in Raleigh, about 18%. 600 live in Cary, and 350 commute in from Durham. Roughly, if you look at the category on the right, roughly 70% are driving 10 to 20, less than 10 miles or 10 to 24 miles to get to Garner on a daily for their primary job. Do you have any questions on those demographics? You will get copies of the slides so that if you do it. Okay. So at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Alicia to talk about the housing affordability plan and go over some of that in more detail.
Thank you, Brian. All right, so giving kind of some of the statistics and data that we've just reviewed for Garner specifically, but also looking at it from a community-wide standpoint, the Board of Commissioners thought it was important for us to have a plan for how we address housing affordability over the long term. So understanding that we're growing by 67 people a day, that we have a fantastic quality of life here in Wake County, and that more people are going to want to come to this area for opportunity and to take part in that. We wanted to make sure that keeping in mind housing and housing affordability was important for us. So we were charged with creating a steering committee for guidance and community input in affordable housing planning process. So that was back in September. That committee consisted of 32 different members representing all kinds of subject matter experts, stakeholders, and general public across the community in living and working in all different municipalities within Wake County. And that committee started meeting in January of 2017. It worked throughout the year on creating and crafting, along with Wake County staff, as well as consultants, this affordable housing plan that took a look at what do we, at our long-term goals for the next 20 years, and a comprehensive goal. And ultimately that plan was approved by the Board of Commissioners in October of last year. And it was really important throughout this entire process that we kept in mind that we wanted this to be not just a Wake County plan and not just a paperweight that sits on the shelf, but that it was a useful document for the community to pick up and be able to find recommendations that fit their need. We wanted our municipal partners to be able to utilize the plan. We wanted our nonprofit partners, also our economic development and business and private sector partners to be able to look at this plan and say, here are the issues that I'm facing in my community or in my business, and these are the recommendations that I think fit the best way that I see how we build out and kind of help to answer some of these concerns we may have. So fundamentally, the goal of the plan is to ensure that quality, affordable housing is available for all Wake County residents. And we also wanted to keep in mind a few other things, and that was making sure that we were maximizing the benefit because we know that public resources are limited. We also wanted to ensure that we were supporting the overall growth within the housing market, because ultimately, if the housing market is not keeping pace with our population growth, the market becomes really tight and things get really expensive. And when that happens, people with less resources are the ones that tend to lose out. We also wanted to make sure that with our public resources, we were focusing on populations that had the greatest need. The other thing is we wanted to pursue locally appropriate solutions. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't necessarily recommending things that we weren't able to do in the community, that didn't fit within the community and what the community wants. And so we wanted to make sure that we kept that in mind. And then ultimately, the plan is not about just putting more units on the ground or just building more housing to get our numbers up to where we want them to be. The plan is about using housing as an economic platform for opportunity and making sure that we are really improving the life of our citizens and our residents here in the community, and that we're overall improving the diversity and the quality of life that we have to offer. So after looking at the data that we had available from the Census Bureau, from several different resources, we realized that Wake County, not unlike a lot of other communities across the nation, is facing a growing housing crisis. And there was 5 trends that led us to this conclusion. First is that our rapid population growth is generating upward pressure on both the home ownership and the rental market. This is predominantly seen in the rental market right now, as homeownership is relatively affordable due to the lower interest rates still. But we're seeing that our rental prices are increasing at a drastic pace. We're also seeing that population growth and that overall housing growth is putting pressure on the market. And so, as I mentioned, when the market is getting tight, we're seeing those prices drive up. We also saw that incomes have not kept pace with the escalating cost of housing. And so when you look from 2007 to 2017, housing costs has increased by 35%, whereas incomes for those without a bachelor's degree have only increased by about 16%. And incomes for those earning higher wages or with higher education has not kept pace either. And so what you're seeing is a growing divide between what housing cost is and what incomes are in our community. We've also seen that we've experienced some housing growth after the recession, but we've not yet reached back to the levels of growth that we were seeing prior to the recession. And so that's done 2 things. So first off, we're not at that level that we were growing prior to the recession, but we are also growing by more people. The second is that we've not filled in that gap from those years during the recession of where we weren't growing at a fast pace. And so what you're seeing there is that this overall housing growth is, again, putting more pressure on the market and is helping and assisting kind of in the housing crisis that we're seeing. We're also losing housing. And so we're losing housing that is naturally affordable as well as publicly subsidized housing. So our naturally occurring affordable housing is going to be those older homes or those C&D multifamily properties that are just relatively more affordable due to age. What we're seeing is that, and I think I read something a few months back, that Wake County or the Triangle region is one of the top 5 places in the nation to come purchase multifamily property right now. So we're seeing a lot of those older property stocks getting purchased and getting flipped, and then the rents being increased. we're also seeing that on the publicly subsidized piece of that too. And I think there's, we all have a good example of what happened in that scenario last year just across the street. And then the last thing is that Wake County has ultimately, when you look at the numbers of the increased need and the decreased supply, about 56,000 units, a need for about 56,000 units of affordable housing currently, which is likely to expand to as much as 150,000 units in the next 20 years. And so a good graphic just to kind of put all of those things together is that the decreasing supply and the increasing need for our community as it relates to affordable housing is increasing or expanding this unmet need. So that concludes the kind of depressing part of the presentation. So moving on to what we're gonna do about it and what the plan recommends. So ultimately, the 20-year plan is a 20-year plan, and we want to make sure that we're pacing ourselves and that we have recommendations that are appropriate over the next 20 years. But it has 19 different recommendations in the plan. Understanding that 19 things are really hard to get underway, especially if you're trying to not bite off more than you can chew, we narrowed that down to a top 10. And we categorized that top 10 into 3 essential strategy areas. So we want to make sure that we have recommendations that are looking at how we use our land and how we set our land use policies. And this is going to be mostly related to municipalities, since the municipalities are the ones who set the land use policies across the community. We also wanted to look at leveraged programs. So again, understanding that public resources are limited, what are the ways that we can leverage additional dollars or leverage additional capacity to create programs that we get our biggest bang for our buck. And then, of course, new public resources. So we wanted to look at what are the financial tools as well as the non-financial tools that we could potentially utilize to help increase the growth of affordable housing and help to maintain housing affordability. And so the bullets represent our top 10 list there. So moving into implementation. So for the county's approach to this is the recommended implementation timeline that's included in the plan. The county is a little bit more realistic about how quickly government can move in implementing things, so we've extended out these priorities to be something that we're working on over the next 3 to 5 years. But you can see we're trying to target things in different focus areas to make sure that we're utilizing a layering approach because there's not one silver bullet that will solve the housing problem. We're looking at things such as public land disposition, looking at any land use policy that we can partner with municipalities on, as well as enhanced funding sources. Looking at enhancing our current rental loan production program and creating some warning systems so we know when we're about to lose those properties that are being converted from affordable to higher rents. As well as the county really wants to work in the supportive housing realm, and again, that's where you combine housing with services. And so this supports this particular approach supports a lot of the vulnerable populations that the county already serves through our Human Services Department. And we have a robust supportive housing program, but we know that there's more need out there than we currently have units and services available for. And so this is an approach that we are very interested at from a county perspective. And then for some potential roles of Garner, some things to think about in preparing for the next 20 years of growth. And you'll see that many of these things kind of mention transit as well. And so transit and transportation is huge in playing a role in the affordability of individuals within the community. For the most part, individuals are paying around 50% of their incomes when you combine housing and transportation. And for those that are cost burdened, they're paying much more than that. And so it's important for us to keep those two things in mind. So as it relates to the essential strategy areas, so land use management, looking at land use and zoning. And so some of the things that municipalities have the ability to look at are cost mitigating factors as it relates to their policies that they provide. So looking at things like flexible dimension standards or minimum lot sizes, streamlined development review, as of right zoning or by right zoning, which allows developers to be able to shorten down the time that they're able to get a product on the ground, which ultimately decreases costs. So some of these things can be done just by enacting policy. As well, you'll see there as looking at affordable housing incentive overlays, which are strategies that incentivize affordable housing development in certain targeted areas. And you most often see those combined with transit corridors. The other is looking at variety in housing types. And so you want to make sure that, I think in Brian's slide, you saw that there was a really heavy amount of single-family detached homes. One of the easiest ways to make homes more affordable is the economy of scale. And so what you're seeing is there's a lot of talk about what we call the missing middle. So you either have large multifamily properties or you have single-family homes. But there's a lot of products and types in between there that can help to assist in housing affordability. So looking at duplexes or townhomes or quadruplexes, where you can add more units to a property to help decrease either the rent or decrease the purchase price of that property. There is also conversation about accessory dwelling units, and so with a large amount of single-family homes, the ability to add an accessory unit for a family member or for an individual who doesn't need a large house is a way to create an affordable housing type that allows for access to neighborhood settings without necessarily, and for increase in units without necessarily changing the fabric of the neighborhood. The second area is neighborhood revitalization, and so really here is looking at targeted improvements and housing rehabilitation. Garner already does fantastic work in partnership with Wake County in participating with our rehabilitation program for elderly and disabled individuals, as well as our emergency grant program. We also work with the town of Garner on doing specific infrastructure improvements. The county is contributing funding to the Garner Recreation Center, which is underway. We've also done driving or paving, such as Holman Drive, or drainage improvements on Rand Mill. Those have been partnerships to target areas for improvement within Garner. I think over the last 26 years, Wake County and Garner have partnered together to spend more than $5 million in grant funding. So this area is really about keeping up that partnership and continuing to look at areas where we can target infrastructure improvements with rehabilitation and housing opportunities to improve those neighborhoods. And then the last is resources. So one of those ways to look at non-traditional resources is public land disposition. Currently, the county is working on a public land disposition analysis for us, where we are analyzing county-owned property that would be suitable for either disposition with the funding to fund affordable housing development elsewhere, or looking for sites that may be suitable for affordable housing development on those sites. Public land can be disposed of based off a general statute for public purpose, and affordable housing is considered a public purpose. So there are some great examples in other communities of where land has been disposed of to support and subsidize property to make that housing affordable for individuals. And then the last is looking at TIFs or synthetic TIFs and special assessment districts. And this is where you can issue bonds for additional funding or create a special assessment district to generate revenue. And typically you'll see these combined in areas that you're expecting transit improvements. And this is a way, so if you were creating a special assessment district for a critical infrastructure project, So a way you could put in potentially your improvement would be a parking deck, and then you would be able to generate revenue based off of the infrastructure that you've created there. And so you often see these resources and tools used in combination with an overlay district, and specifically targeted to an area where you're going to see a high level of growth. And so that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
Anybody got a question?
Sure. You want to start in there?
That'd be good. Go ahead.
Let me first of all just thank you all for coming out today. This is, in my view, an important topic, and I believe you alluded to it in your presentation. It's an issue not only here in this area, across the state of North Carolina, but across the United States. And it's a greater problem in some areas than others, I'm sure. But something we did discuss at our retreat, and so this is a nice follow-up to that. You've given us a lot of information to try to take it all in, so I need to go back and take some time and review. Just a couple of things to begin with. As you think about the task force and all the things you've pulled together, and this is sort of a general question, not related strictly to Garner, but how much do you see the private sector as being a major factor in this, and how well is this going to be supported? When I say the private sector, I'm talking about landowners and developers and those kinds of folks. Are we expecting a big buy-in by those individuals or those entities?
Are you reaching out to them?
I'll start, and then I'll let them give a probably much more detailed answer than I could. But I've personally had conversations with developers such as John Kane, who's a major player in Wake County. And yes, we have initiated those conversations. One of the things that I hear repeatedly from developers is that, they're in the business that they're in to make money. And they tend to separate their sort of charitable donations or charitable contributions. And so one of the issues in terms of all the new apartments that you see going up, especially in the downtown Raleigh area, those brand new apartment buildings or condo buildings are not affordable. Not even affordable for the average person making the area median income. For example, in downtown Raleigh, you might see studio apartments selling successfully at over $1,000 a month, or $1 million condos that are 1,200 square feet. So I wouldn't say we certainly engage the developer community. Will they be a key player in this? Absolutely. One of the things that I've been talking to developers about personally would be mixed income opportunities within those fancy buildings that they're building. But, will they be a driver? Based on the conversations I've had, probably not, because at the end of the day, their bottom line is to, build as many units as possible and get, the largest amount they can get for those units.
Yeah, so two things. We had representation from the Home Builders Association on our steering committee. And one of the biggest things that they talked about is that right now in Wake County, they can't build a new home for less than $200,000. And so if they can't build it for less than $200,000 at cost, how can they make it affordable? And so they gave us some ideas on some of the things that I talked about in land use policy and in streamlining of zoning and review processes. It costs them a lot of money for land, so the land disposition is one strategy to help in that area. It also costs them a lot of money and time in review processes, as well as some of the regulations. And so I think if there are ways that we can compromise in some of those areas, I think that they would be supportive in that. The other piece is that we're looking at incentive overlay districts, which offers some of those as incentives. And so if an incentive to build affordable housing and you're putting in a 100-unit complex, and we can somehow look at, is there ways that we can combine some local subsidy with some expedited review process or some decreased parking requirements? does that make it worth your while then for your bottom line to put in 20 of those units being affordable at this income range? So that's a strategy there too. The other thing that we are looking at is an acquisition and a preservation fund, and what that would do, it would take county capital and potentially leveraging other public capital dollars in combination with a banking institute or a financial institute to match those dollars. And then also we would charge that financial institute with bringing in philanthropic dollars to create a fund that allows for developers of affordable housing only to access that for either acquisition of property or for preservation of existing units. And so they would be able to access that funding in the same manner that a regular developer goes to the bank to access their line of credit, which allows them to compete in the same market. Because the other thing also is that our developers who are developing affordable housing are primarily getting subsidized through government process, which takes a long time. And so if they see a great opportunity, a lot of times the nonprofits don't have the equity line to be able to go out there and purchase something just like a private developer is, and they're losing out in that. And so this is a strategy for us to allow them to compete in a level playing field.
And we do have nonprofit developers that we work very closely with. DHIC, CASA, Evergreen is also one of the nonprofit developers that are very good partners with the county.
Just a quick comment, Mr. Mayor, and I'll defer to others. I know others want to ask questions. One of the things you mentioned in your data here that interests me would be, certainly Garner is interested in transit and the future for transit here, and obviously we expect to be on the commuter rail line, and so I noted one of the items you mentioned there is the sensitivity to having affordable housing within reasonable areas of transit stops. So as we plan ahead and look ahead, that's something I think we ought to look at. I may want to ask, but I'll defer to others. Thank you.
Jack, you got a question?
Yeah, you stated that the population growth for Wake County is about 67. Do you see anytime soon that those figures will continue to rise, or will they go down, or which way do you think they'll go?
Based on past trends, so the 67 a day is just basically since 2010. Between 2000 and 2010, we were growing 75, 80 a day, with some years being roughly a little over 100 back during the peak boom years of 05, 06, 07. So the 67 a day is relatively stable, but could go higher. So based on previous trends, we're growing quickly, but on the lower end of that quickly compared to times in the 90s and early 2000s. So it could increase from that 67. It depends on economic factors and then the movement of people to Wake County. Because roughly out of those 67 a day, roughly 20, low 20s is from births. The rest is from migration from out of North Carolina and within North Carolina. One of our biggest factors is people within North Carolina moving to Wake County. So we track that every year, and we look for any changes or fluctuation in that number. But it's roughly been in the mid-60s since 2010.
Do you have any data on that that would give you anything to tell you approximate what percentage of those are senior citizens that would probably need help?
We can definitely gather that information.
Are there any individuals out there who are willing to participate in helping with? My concern is senior citizens who cannot afford to even pay holiday to buy the grocery and pay the light bill. Are there any people that you're working with out there that's willing to step up and say, okay, I'm gonna build some apartments or houses to help those people that cannot afford it? Not the young folks who are able to work. I'm talking about the ones that are retired or drawing a little small income.
I know some of the projects that we've supported, just since I've been on the board, is I know there was a senior apartment building in Cary that was built by DHIC, and I know Evergreen also does some senior housing as well. But our county and these commissioners have put a great focus on senior housing specifically.
And a great example of that locally is going to be Pennington Grove, which is an 83-unit senior complex that just opened in December here in Garner. The developer is DHIC. They've submitted this year during the tax credit process another phase 2 to that project, which is Pennington Grove 2, which would be an additional 60 units. And so we're seeing a lot of growth in senior development apartment complexes in the community. It's definitely an area that's ticking up.
Going east, do you find that the small towns are having the same problem? I know it wouldn't be as great as they are here in Wake County.
So I think small towns are having housing affordability problems. They're also having, the other piece of that too is housing stock problems just in general. You have a lot of aging stock, and I think as you look in other areas, they have a lot of problems with appropriate housing because of the age of the stock of housing, and then people being able to access that newer, nicer housing is not in an affordable range. So I think you're seeing it really nationwide. It may be more prevalent in an urban area that's growing much faster than a rural area. But across the nation, generally, incomes have not kept up with the cost of housing. And so you're seeing that gap widen pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, and what's typically called as the grain of America, everywhere, every county, every town in this nation is getting older. In Wake County alone, I think when we look at the state demographers' projections, the number of people 55 and older in our county will double in the next 20 years. And so senior housing, we think it's an issue now. It will only be a greater issue as most of us age and approach those categories, or are already in those categories. Will continue to have housing needs. As we live longer, the demand to either stay in your home or to find a place to move to is a challenge. And that's nationwide.
Thank you.
This is a good plan. And I've learned it's a national concern, right? It's not just Wake County, Wake everything.
Something you just said, and something you mentioned earlier about the housing stock getting older, which you said in Garner, over 50% of the homes have been built before 1990. That's what makes Garner different than some of those communities. We used to be bigger there. We're not larger than anymore. Wake Forest, Apex, Holly Springs. Because more of their houses is new housing stock, which is much higher. Price of a lot of subdivisions. I mean, Forest Hills back here was built in the 60s. I used to live in School Acres, which is over there by the old high school. I lived in a house that was built in 1955. And so we do have a lot of older housing stock here in Garner. I do appreciate the information and the demographic information you provided. You mentioned y'all talked about habitat, and we approved a habitat community back several months ago, 14, 16 homes, I believe, here. Also working with the county to expand the Delta Street apartments. I go there, I deliver Meals on Wheels there. Also deliver Meals on Wheels to an Evergreen project off of Creeks Road. I own low-income housing. Wife and I have owned a townhouse since 1991. That's part of the tax credit system, and have kept it, have not changed and left it low income, so it can assist folks. Had the same tenant for almost 20 years. She was wonderful. That was a big plus in keeping it that way. But been very fortunate from that standpoint, having that one rock solid tenant to help. It's a shame some of those tax credit programs died, because that's what got some of these low-income housing projects built, is the incentive for people to help support it. Now they're doing it by, a large builder does a big project, but if you have a lot of individual owners, seems like a better way to go to me. But anyway, that's just me talking. Now with the price of land, because that project was built in 1991, it wasn't in Raleigh, it was not annexed, it was annexed later. South off Creeks Road and Sanderford Road. So, and people want to buy those. I get letters every month, notes. You want to sell? Do you want to sell? Do you want to sell? And I don't think they're going to leave it at low income. So I appreciate the information. I know that you provided the median housing value here. I know that the 27529 zip code here in Garner is one of the lower, in the lower 25% in the county as far as median housing value. So we have some maybe affordable or labor force housing here in Garner, but it's not affordable for some people. It's the information that you provided us helps. So the demographics are good information. This is an interesting project because as you talk about downtown Raleigh, for some of the transit's going to be, they can't afford to live there. I mean, we're still pushing the people who may need the transit out, and so that's a big concern. Also, a big concern is when we see other communities say this as nice as they can. You see news reports where the citizens publicly say we don't want this community here, and the Habitat for Humanity goes from 28 or 26 down to whatever it was, down to whatever it went to. It's pretty
14 to
unfortunate.
9, or 14 to 7.
It was
It
bigger than
started
that.
off even higher than 14 and ended up at 9. So they actually decreased it twice.
I think it was in the 20s to begin with.
I believe it was about 23, and then it went down to 14, and then it went down to 9.
So anyway, that's what it is. I mean, back years ago, the town had some land. We had some land over there off Woodland Road. Can't remember the name of the street, but we gave it some extra land the town had for years and gave it to Habitat. They built 3 houses on it. So anyway, I appreciate the information. It's a good presentation. It's a problem that's not going away. I know that there was an article written in the NNO last year in September. We talked about it at our retreat one time. Some proposals to consider at one time, just talked about raising the sales tax and use some of that to help with affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera. But the numbers it showed and the numbers that you're showing here, how fast it may grow, that's not even keeping up with what was talked about. Something different may come from your committee, the commission. But anyway, thanks for coming and we appreciate the information.
One thing I wanted to, thank you for what you've done in terms of keeping that home affordable, because not many people have the heart to do that. In a lot of conversations that I've had, most people, or many people, are more concerned about their bottom line, and as opposed to taking the Section 8 tenant or someone at a lower income level, they tend to skew towards the higher income levels. But one thing I always stress when I'm talking about affordable housing is oftentimes people don't realize how much it impacts all of us. So if you've noticed, if you've gone to buy a house in the past couple of years, because of our growth and everything's about supply and demand. So because there's a high demand and very little supply, it's impacting all of us. For example, I went from buying a condo to a townhouse, and my goal was to then go from a townhouse to a house. Well, now in the neighborhood where I live, the townhouses are now in the $300,000, $400,000 range. And so at every income level, you're starting to see that we're all getting less house for more money. We're getting less product for more money. And so whether you're buying a house at $100,000, which you can barely find, like if you go on Zillow or Trulia right now, look at houses in Wake County for under $100,000, one, you're not going to find a whole lot. And what you do find is going to need a substantial amount of work. But even at the 200,000 range, 300,000 range, you're starting to see that the market is incredibly competitive. You're having less time to bid or make offers. You're getting multiple offers, which is very good if you're selling your home. But what good is selling your home if you can't go and buy anything else? So this isn't sort of just a poor people's problem or a problem for people making under a certain amount. Even at the $500,000, $1 million range, you're getting less for what you would have gotten many years ago.
And one piece of data that we didn't bring today that we've been analyzing, right after the recession, there were a lot of LLCs created that bought a lot of single-family homes in Wake County that were once, Jessica could go buy, Commissioner Holmes, I could go buy. When they pulled that LLC out of Phoenix, bought 30 homes in one town in Wake Forest or in Knightdale, those units, they paid cash, the financing was in place. Those 30 homes are basically out of the inventory. We're never buying them as a single family house again. They're renting them, or if anything, they're gonna flip those to another LLC when they feel like they've made their money, you could say. So there were thousands of units purchased since the recession by many different LLCs. And we separate them from Brian Coates LLC, who owns just one, versus when it's Homes for America based in Phoenix that owns 50. And so we've kind of separated the data, but that is a factor that they're buying $400,000 homes that would have been available for anyone else to purchase, but are now off the market. So that is a factor that the game has changed a little bit since the recession when it comes to home ownership as well.
That's a very excellent point. When I was competing to buy a house, one of the challenges that I had as someone who would have had to get a mortgage were so many cash buyers at $200,000, $300,000. So, I mean, this is again a problem for everyone, because even if you have great credit, even if you make good money like I do, it's very difficult to compete in the housing market here in Wake County, especially when you have people at that level who can just walk up and say, you know, I'll close in 10 days, all cash.
Well,
First of all, like the other council members, we appreciate you educating us. And really, it's an education, and it's a continuing education, because we were introduced to this. We had a good discussion for a couple of hours at our planning retreat in the fall. This is, I see at least I recognize some of the same language. There's a lot more data here, and it'll take a while to process, and quite frankly, at least I have seen some faces before, and now with some names. I want to be able to share this information, and quite frankly, tonight's not the forum, but I'd want to be able to digest some of this. But we do appreciate you being here and presenting the opportunity. With that having been said, I got probably some statements, but several questions. Going back early when we were talking about less than 30% of the housing goes, less than 30% of the income going to housing, or no greater than 30% going to housing. Is that number, when we say devoted to housing, is that just the rent or the mortgage, or is that the rent or the mortgage and the utilities combined? What constitutes that 30%?
Yes, so that's the rent, the mortgage, utilities, taxes, things like that.
Garbage?
Yes, other utilities, garbage, water, things like that. Yes.
I didn't recognize the acronym. So that's, quite frankly, that's, when I read the information from last fall and was trying to process that, I can recall when we first got out there and buying that starter home. I can assure you that more than 30% of my income was going towards housing and utilities and all of that. 30% would be a very desirable goal and very hard to attain, because I think has anybody really considered, is that a little bit abnormally low? It's not realistic?
So that's the number that is the definition used by U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Generally, when you're paying more than 30% of your income, you are deemed as cost burdened. For individuals who are making a little bit higher income, you may have the choice to pay more than 30% of your income. For those that are earning at the bottom of the income ranges, you don't really have a choice, because really what you're fighting with when you're paying more than that 30% is, how am I going to feed my family? How am I going to fix my car and pay for gas? And so we also have a metric that is, if you're paying more than 50% of your income, you're what's considered severely cost burdened. And the statistics on that across the county are pretty staggering as well. And so, half of your income on housing is kind of the next level of the metric to look at, and it is pretty staggering also.
So to clarify, the 30% is not Wake County's number. It's sort of like industry standard when you're talking about affordable housing from the federal government.
And let's face it, you go to the grocery store in Wake County, and then it's affordable to travel 30 miles and go to a grocery store. It really is. Or even 10 miles in some instances. You get the same thing for lesser prices. Number two, what is we had a presentation made to us by the Triangle J Council of Government. Is there a relationship between Wake County and the COG in doing this, or are they doing their thing and how are you related or unrelated?
So we keep in constant communication with them on a whole host of things. We're working with them on, they're looking at transit and affordable housing right now. We're working with them on that. They're looking at a potential warning system and submitting grants to implement things related to opportunities. So we're consistently working with them on that. They were attending all of our steering committee meetings. And so it's a great partnership that we have with them, and I think we're aligned in a lot of the ways that we're working. So we're swimming upstream together.
And so, of course, they're covering a broader area than Wake County.
Yes.
And one of the later slides, one of the parts of the implementation was on the public land disposition. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, where you're saying that the town, by virtue of having the right of eminent domain, could purchase property and turn it around and target it for housing?
So that is a strategy. What we're currently looking at related to that is if there's already county or town-owned land that would be suitable. So maybe you have acquired it, we're going to build something on it, didn't, or acquired it through a foreclosure or something like that. Would there be an opportunity to utilize that property for affordable housing? And so we're with the county. I think Commissioner Holmes has talked a lot about, is there surplus land within the school system? Is there surplus land within, we bought something and we're potentially going to use it for a convenience center, and now, it no longer fits in that area, or we had planned to build a library here and we're no longer going to do that. So those are the things we're looking at the county level, but there may be some opportunities at a local level of where there's municipal owned land that is no longer going to be used for the purpose that it was originally intended. The next phase to that would be to look at, are there areas where a town has a really great offer or opportunity for a property that it could potentially purchase and utilize for housing. But that would be kind of phase 2 of what we would be looking at currently.
Public land disposition is one thing you'll notice in the plan is you don't see any dollar amounts. You don't see tax or property tax. So one of my personal goals in implementing affordable housing is to do all the things that we can do that essentially won't cost us any money. It doesn't cost us anything to engage our partners. The reason surplus property is so important to me is the county and many municipalities have land that you purchase for one reason or another, and that land could be suitable for affordable housing. One of their issues with affordability is the cost. So, for example, if we have land that we can sell to Habitat for fair market value or sell to Habitat for $1, and they don't have to compete with the developer or commercial real estate. So I'll give you an example. I have about 3 or 4 acres in Morris that at one point I believe we were planning to use for a library site, and bought it a long time ago at a very good price, and now we've chosen a different site for the library. So now the county has 3 or 4 acres. We're assessing to see if that's usable for affordable housing, and if it is, then my intention is to work with one of our nonprofit developers to either give them that land at fair market value, which most land in Wake County is going way above that because of the competition, and or sell it to them for $1, sell it to them for a very moderate amount. We have leases with municipalities that are $1 for 99. The one that goes with surplus property is to use the resources we have to create opportunities for affordable housing. And you'll see a lot of things like that when it comes to changing all the things that we can do now. And those are all things cost us anything but time. Very big focus for me as chair this year is implementing what we can initially without attaching any sort of additional funds or tax. We just have the transit bond because we know some construction needs as it relates to education. So we're trying to be very mindful of the tax base.
Aside from Cary, which we've mentioned, how are other towns responding to the program that Wake County is promoting?
It's been very positive. For example, I was in Wake Forest this morning doing a presentation before the chamber, and I congratulated the mayor on a habitat project that came before our board a couple weeks ago. And what was so great about it was we didn't even hear about it as commissioners until it was done. The community embraced it. The town council embraced it. There was no opposition to it, and so we were incredibly excited that there are municipalities that are embracing it, and we're still in constant communication with the town of Cary, and one of the councilwomen on the town of Cary actually served on the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. So we've gotten a very positive reception. The only concern that I usually hear when I'm talking about affordable housing is people saying, how much is this going to cost me? How much is Wake County designating towards this? And that's why I put a great focus on things like the UDOs and land use and surplus and the partnerships that we have. Because as of right now, we're doing a great job of having an impact without necessarily having to raise taxes or create a separate source of revenue.
I have some mixed feelings because it seems like that internally we're working at cross purposes. You're probably, you've got the data here that shows you what our housing stock is. And we're not the pride of Wake County. I mean, we've got some of the lowest priced housing in the county. And, and we got a plenty of, quote, that lower cost home. And I'm not so sure how much it truly is affordable or not. I really don't know. I could just speculate that if we got a lot of that stock, must be, some of it, a lot of it ought to be in the affordable range. But from what we're seeing here is all the single family and owner occupied. So we got the wrong kind. So we need a different kind of stock. Now, and Ms. Holmes, I know you know a lot about Garner versus Wake County versus Raleigh. We've got the average cost of homes in Garner is already the lowest in the county. And the best way I can interpret this is you're asking us to press the housing market already, that we've already got. You're saying that a $190,000 home is not affordable.
Well, for starters, affordability really depends on the individual and how much they earn.
Yes, ma'am. So it's not a target price on a home?
Not necessarily, because, for me, a $200,000, $300,000 house is affordable. But, for someone making $750 minimum wage, a $300,000 house is not affordable, and they're going to be spending way more than that 30% on their housing. So affordability really depends, each of you will have a different sort of level of affordability based off of your income and what you make or what you bring in.
So our goal is to never, in affordable housing, kind of our primary goal is to never concentrate poverty or concentrate low income or to depress housing markets. I think what we're trying to do over the next 20 years is to prepare the county and ourselves and our municipal partners for the growth that we're going to experience and for the investments and the economics that we're likely going to experience. I think that the transit corridors and this transit plan is going to change things in a major way. And I think from the affordable housing standpoint, we want to make sure that housing affordability is not completely wiped out by that. We want to make sure that our communities are growing on the higher income level, so you're building houses that are attractive at all income levels. The biggest piece for us is making sure that for those that the market is not creating housing for, that they're not left out of the ability to maintain their residence in Wake County, and that we're not asking folks or by policies or however saying, you don't make enough, you can't live here. And so I think that's just what we want to keep in mind, but we certainly don't want to depress housing markets. We just don't want to see them become unreachable for those in our community who are providing some of the most essential roles.
The largest source of the county's revenue is property taxes. So if we were to depress, property values, then that would decrease the amount of revenue that we receive and function. So we enjoy and appreciate that houses appreciate and are valued as high as possible.
One thing to keep in mind that we've had conversations with a few other municipalities where the large amount of their workers that work in the town come from other towns is we need to look at our housing product to say, why don't they want to live here? Is it because we don't have a lot of townhouses? Do we need more certain types of rentals? Do we need a mixture of housing units? Because we know in a market, you'll hear from a lot of developers, the millennials and retirees want a lot of those walkable neighborhoods. They want to be close to amenities. Does that mean maybe we need more parks, or should we concentrate on different types of units? So for us, the goal is to have all types of units at all price ranges in your community. It is not to create all houses over 400,000 or all houses under 100. It is a goal is to have. So if you take a job in Garner, North Carolina, there is a house for either rent or own or some type of unit that you can probably afford. Whether that's you're taking a job with a retailer or you're an executive that works for a corporation that's located in your industrial park. You need to have a mixture of housing types.
Let me give you a practical example. 1/3, at least according to what COG gave us, 1/3 of the jobs in Garner represent the 2 lowest paying employment categories on the full spectrum. The lowest 2, retail and food service. It is hard to put into the mix that we want to increase more of those jobs. And I'm missing the point, I'm sure. So we have been fighting the battle, and I'll tell you, with the Wake County Board of Education for decades, to try to have an assignment policy that helps us get out of the doldrums, get off the bottom. And so we're struggling to raise the neighborhood, and that's what they're struggling against. So, and then, did I listen wrong? Did I dream it? Are the county commissioners considering dedicating a portion of the tax base specifically for affordable housing?
Not at this time. And in fact, I just said the opposite. What we're doing right now is trying to focus on policy changes. Sorry. Right now we're trying, so to go back and start my answer over again, what I just said is basically the opposite, in that Wake County, as of right now, is not considering a dedicated source. As of right now, our focus is doing the things that basically only cost us time and staff. So, for example, when we talk about the surplus property, we are doing an assessment of the surplus property that we have available now that we can either donate to a nonprofit for affordable housing or sell and use that towards affordable housing. So as of right now, we are working very hard to not increase taxes for affordable housing, particularly because we just had a transit bond. And because we know we have some construction needs when it comes to our school system. So there may be an education bond that's on the horizon. So right now, in terms of the affordable housing plan, we're really working to see what we can do without adding an additional sort of tax burden right now.
But Buck is correct. The last time we had a major discussion about affordable housing, the developers came forward and told us we've got too much affordable housing already. You remember that, Buck?
Well,
That's what you said.
some of them were running away from us, but I tell you, I've asked enough questions, and I appreciate it, because Alicia, Brian, you all are grounded. You know what you're talking about. You got the numbers. Ms. Holmes, you got the broader picture, the higher level picture. And this is not necessarily a fun thing to do, because you know you're walking uphill when you come here. You knew what you were headed for when you walked in the door. This was
Absolutely, we're still here.
yes, ma'am. In
Glad
spite
to
of the
be.
ball game, who is it that's playing? Not my team tonight.
Trojan.
Garner's playing South Central at
In the
7
playoffs.
o'clock in the playoffs.
You're playing in Garner tonight.
That tells you how abreast of things I am. But this won't be the last conversation, I'm sure. But I wanted people in the community to hear what you had to say, and I will want to get some of this information passed on to other folks that have an interest in it. There's other questions, but you all have been very patient with us and long-suffering, so thank you all for being here. We go back to Ken, he may have some closing comments, and then I probably, before you leave, is that, what's your message to us as you walk out the door, as you leave tonight? What is the message? Because I'm probably just mired deep in the details and missed the whole thing.
So I think the main message for us is that, and again, to address this, so the Wake County Affordable Housing Plan is on the Wake website, and so it's a 156-page document, but we have a great 16-page executive summary if you don't feel like reading that. But it is there, and we just want to continue the conversation. We want to continue to partner with Garner. We want to continue to have these conversations, and so if there's any questions or anything that comes up, feel free to direct folks our way or ask us.
My message is, again, let's keep the conversation going. If you all want us to come back for part 2, we're happy to do that. If there are any resources or data that we can pull for you and provide, we have a great team, and as you can see, we love data and love, statistics and graphs. So if there are any demographic information, we can do pie charts, we can do heat maps. Whatever it is that you need from us in terms of information, we're happy to provide that. I think for me, when it comes to talking about affordable housing, I think the education piece is important, because many people don't realize who needs affordable housing, and that each of us has an affordability issue in a market that's booming like Wake County. So oftentimes people make assumptions about people who need affordable housing. And we talked about the fact that Wake County, just overall, is one of the most expensive places to live in North Carolina. Minimum wage is still $7.50. In Wake County, a living wage is about $15.09. So it's not just about, people that don't work, because most people that need affordable housing have a job. So what I just really want to leave you with is just understanding who needs affordable housing, and that it's not just who you think. Back in the day, in the 80s, 90s, when people thought of affordable housing, they thought projects. They thought tall buildings, drug-infested, bad people. Now, as you looked at the charts, in Wake County, we're pricing out our teachers. We're pricing out our law enforcement officers. We're pricing out town and county staff. We're pricing out government workers. So I think, it's very important to have an education about who needs affordable housing. So as you have children and grandchildren that are starting to look for their first home, they're not getting what you maybe had the opportunity to get when you purchased your first home.
Well, one thing that you said something that reminded me of this. I know the intentions, they're great intentions, and sometimes when we're working in that silo, then we wind up with it affecting other areas with unintended consequences. And if there's one message that I'd let, or I'll say message, a thought, it may not be well-founded, but we can't operate in silos. Housing and the education, as you mentioned, they've got to talk to each other, and they can't use to double down and depress in both areas at the same time. So there's some political discussions that have to be made to let those silos not be so strict and different, but recognize the impact that one has on the other. That's what we're struggling with that in Garner, and until we know more how to address it, it's hard to get the positive responses. So we have to educate ourselves, and y'all have gone a long way in helping do that. I appreciate what you brought to the table tonight.
We don't need another surprise like Forest Hills either. Has it been addressed?
One more.
Alicia mentioned the warning system. And so one problem with the Forest Hill situation is that we didn't know.
We didn't either.
So
We took
until
the blame.
Octavia Rainey walked down the aisle in a board meeting with residents, we did not know. So like literally we're sitting, in our board chambers, and we see all these people walk in. And that was the first time I had ever even heard of the word Forest Hills. And so putting that preservation or that warning system in place so that we know when, hope I'm using the right terminology, so that we know when properties are basically, their tax credits are expiring. And it gives us the opportunity to, one, see if it's something that one of our nonprofit partners wants, or it gives us an opportunity to just figure it out. But Forest Hills was just a harsh lesson for Wake County because we just did not know, and we didn't have any mechanism in place that would have warned us. So one of the recommendations is a warning system so that as properties near their tax credits expiring and the possibility of them being flipped, so that we at least have a heads up. Very similar to what's happening with Sir Walter in downtown Raleigh, which is a senior community. At least in that situation, they have several years to figure out placement and a warning. We found out about Forest Hills literally like as people walked down and told us about it, like after the flyers had already been put up on the doors.
How about the developer from Texas that bought the whole city block 4 streets away from Fayetteville Street, just wiping out? What's been the response to that? That's just displacing the whole crowd, and where are they going? And the closest place is 27529.
I believe I was going to get a chance just to briefly make two comments. The first one, I was pleased to see you mention the Pennington Grove. As a citizen of Garner, I've been to that facility, and I think it's a good example of something that helps address that need. It's certainly new and looks very nice at the present time, and so perhaps more of those kinds of things spread around the county would be helpful. The second thing, and this is probably a discussion for another day, but it seems to me that amongst many of the reasons we need to be concerned about affordable housing is when you look at those who are near the bottom rung of this process,
Thank you.
those are the people who potentially are maybe one step away from homelessness. And so I think homelessness is a problem we didn't touch on, and we can discuss that another day. But if we don't properly address this, then there are going to be some people at the bottom echelon that are going to just kind of drop out. And then I think you will exacerbate the issue of homelessness, not only here, but in other places as well. So a lot of spin-offs from the whole issue, but thank you for all the good work you do in that area, and it's going to be an ongoing process, no doubt. Thank you.
George, you listen well. Do you want to say anything? Okay.
We appreciate y'all coming out. I got one question that may strike a nerve. Do you see in the near future where there will be more than one family in a home?
So there's a big demand for accessory dwelling units currently. The county, we changed our policy a few years ago. Previously, we said if you want to put an accessory dwelling for another person, doesn't have to be a relative, it had to be within your current home and had to use the same entrance, which no one wanted to do, and it made it very difficult to do. So we didn't really see any accessory dwelling units.
Say granny flats.
Granny flats. So we changed our policies. We said you could create the unit in your existing house, separate entrance. You could create it in your garage, above your garage, or you could actually just build a smaller unit in the backyard. And so even on well and septic, we see about 10 a year now. The majority of them are using them for family members, but there is no rule that says you can't just rent that to a single person who moves to town and is a teacher and wants a small unit. We limit the size so that they're smaller in nature, but they're still quite big. One trend we are seeing, some home builders are putting the granny flat. You walk up to the main door, you see the entrance straight ahead for the main house. To the left is a small door, and there's an apartment, basically 700, 800 square feet, that can be used family members or another small household. So the trend is there. There is demand. When the national home builder like Lennar starts doing it, there's demand. I definitely think we have to explore the size of units. There's a huge interest. I've lived in apartment complexes. I just recently bought a house last year. So for 40 years of my life was rental. The last building, about half the units were 500 to 600 square feet. They were the hardest to rent. They had a waiting list for singles of all ages who wanted to live in those small, well-designed units. So I think that's something we have to look at, that a traditional, 1,500 square foot building could be easily broken into 2 units. But yeah, multifamily in what looks like a single family house could really help some of those issues with creating some density, but also creating some affordability as well.
But our preference would be for multiple families, if living in a single residence, to be in a defined single residence. We don't want to see a situation of where multiple families are priced out of being able to access housing and then are thus forced to live in a boarding style situation or something like that.
Okay, we spent an hour and a half on this. On behalf of the council, thank you for coming. I'm gonna take a 10-minute break. Y'all take a break.
31.